Welcome to Creepy Horror Stories. Tonight, we present an original tale titled Pine Needle Sutures. It is a story about a holiday tradition that takes a surgical, nightmarish turn. Settle in, dim the lights, and enjoy the descent.
We were about 10 miles outside the city limits when I saw the sign. It was just a piece of weathered plywood, with the words fresh cut, spray painted in a jagged, dark red. The lot was tucked behind a rusted chain-link fence, a lonely patch of gravel surrounded by skeletal hardwoods. There was only one guy working there, a man whose skin looked like dry parchment, wearing a flannel shirt that had faded to the color of dried blood. He didn't say much, just pointed toward a tree standing in the far corner. It was a massive thing, nearly 7 feet tall, and so dark it looked less like deep green and more like bruised ink. The needles weren't soft like the Douglas firs we usually bought. They were rigid, tapering to points as sharp as surgical scalpels. I brushed my thumb against a branch and felt a sting so precise I didn't even realize I was bleeding until a drop of red hit the gray gravel. "I'll take it."
Are you sure, Mark? It looks a bit aggressive, doesn't it?
I laughed it off, handing the man $40. I told her it was just a rare variety, something hardy. We hauled it home on the roof of the SUV, the wind whistling through those needle-sharp branches the whole way back to our suburban cul-de-sac. That evening, I struggled to get the trunk into the iron stand. The wood felt unnaturally dense, more like stone than pine. I finally got it centered in the living room, right in front of the bay window. After the kids went to bed, I sat on the sofa with a beer, watching the shadows the tree cast against the ceiling. Around 2 a.m. the house was silent, but then I heard it. It wasn't the usual settling of floorboards. It was a rhythmic, wet snapping sound coming from the living room, like someone was slowly breaking a series of small, dry chicken bones. I walked out into the hallway, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark. The tree looked different. It seemed wider, the branches spreading further than they had an hour ago. I stood there for a long time, listening to that sickening crunch of wood expanding. But eventually, I convinced myself I was just tired and went back to bed. When I woke up, the air in the bedroom felt heavy, like I was breathing through a damp cloth. I headed downstairs to start the coffee, but I stopped dead at the bottom of the steps. The front door was gone. Not missing, but completely obscured. Thick, gnarled roots, the color of old veins, had forced their way through the door frame, weaving themselves into a solid wall of timber. I ran to the kitchen window, but it was the same story there. Every exit, every crack where light might leak in, had been sealed shut by a lattice of dark, pulsating wood. The locks were jammed with fibrous growth that looked like it had grown 6 inches in a matter of hours. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, and it wasn't just the panic. The house smelled like a dumpster full of rotting oranges and turpentine. It was a cloying, sweet-rot scent that made my head swim. I found Sarah in the hallway, leaning against the wall with a glazed look in her eyes. She didn't seem scared, she just looked bored, her movements slow and heavy. "Sarah, we need to find a way out. The tree, it's growing into the house."
It's fine, Mark. It just smells like Christmas. Let's just sit down.
She sounded like she was drugged. I grabbed her arm to pull her toward the basement, hoping the small hopper windows there were still clear. But then I heard Lily scream from the living room. We ran in to find her sitting on the rug, staring at her hands. Her small fingers were trembling. Protruding from the pores of her forearms were dozens of thin, translucent green filaments. They looked like silk threads, but they were vibrant, pulsating with a faint, sickly light. As I watched, one of the threads lengthened by an inch, sewing itself into the fabric of her sleeve, anchoring her skin to her clothes.
Daddy, it tickles. Why is the tree inside me?
I reached out to pull one of the threads, but as soon as my fingers touched it, Lily shrieked in pain. The thread didn't come out. It pulled her skin taut, showing that it was rooted deep into the muscle. The tree wasn't just in the room anymore. It was starting to feed. I scrambled for my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency call icon, but the screen was a dead slab of glass. No bars, no searching, just a void. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the cordless handset, but there wasn't even the hum of a dial tone. Only a faint, rhythmic pulsing sound, like a slow heartbeat. I tore the base station away from the wall, and my stomach turned. Thick, fibrous tendrils had punched through the plastic casing of the outlet, weaving themselves around the copper wiring and snaking deep into the drywall. The tree wasn't just blocking the exits. It was eating the house's nervous system, drinking the electricity and the data until we were completely cut off from the world outside. The living room had become unrecognizable. The familiar eggshell white paint was disappearing behind a creeping tide of dark, wet bark. It climbed the walls in jagged plates, smelling of old sap and copper. The ceiling sagged as heavy branches bridged the gap from the tree to the corners of the room, turning our cozy family space into the hollowed-out gut of a gargantuan, rotting trunk. Every time I moved, the floor felt softer, more like mulch than hardwood. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the garage and grabbed my heavy-duty felling axe. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I marched back into the living room, ignoring the lethargy dragging at my limbs. I'm ending this. Right now. I swung the axe with every bit of desperate strength I had left. The blade bit deep into the black trunk of the tree, but there was no sound of splintering wood. Instead, there was a wet, heavy thud. I pulled the axe back, and a geyser of thick, crimson liquid sprayed across my chest. It wasn't sap. It was hot, metallic, and unmistakably human blood. It soaked my shirt, steaming in the chilled air of the room. Before I could swing again, thin, whip-like vines lashed out from the gash I'd made. They coiled around the steel head of the axe, pulling it from my grip with terrifying force. Within seconds, the tool was absorbed into the trunk, swallowed whole by the bark. Then, the tree shuddered. From the tips of its needle-sharp branches, a cloud of fine, golden dust erupted. It hung in the air like a shimmering fog, beautiful and silent. I tried to cover my mouth, but the first breath I took felt like inhaling liquid lead. My knees hit the floor. I tried to scream for Sarah, to tell her to run, but my jaw felt like it had been welded shut. I wasn't unconscious. My mind was screaming, sharp and panicked, but my body had become a statue. I could see Sarah slumped in the armchair, her eyes wide and wet with tears, her fingers frozen in a half-curl. Lily was on the rug, her small chest barely moving, her gaze locked on the ceiling. The tree began to move again, but this time it was precise. Those long, translucent threads, The ones that had started in Lily's skin began to drift through the air toward us, guided by an invisible current. One drifted toward my face, hovering just inches from my lips. It was followed by a needle, a single, black spine from a nearby branch. With the mechanical rhythm of a sewing machine, the needle pierced my upper lip. I felt the white-hot flash of pain, but I couldn't even flinch. The thread followed, pulling tight. Then the lower lip. Back and forth, the needle worked with agonizing deliberation, lacing my mouth shut in a tight, crisscross pattern of green silk. I watched as another needle approached Sarah, and then Lily. One by one, our voices were physically taken from us, our screams muffled by the systematic, surgical precision of the sutures. We were still awake, still feeling every puncture, but the house had finally become silent. The paralysis held me fast, a prisoner in my own skin. From my vantage point on the floor, I watched the furniture begin its gruesome transition. The oak coffee table didn't just break, it flowed. Its legs lengthened into gnarled roots that dove into the floorboards, seeking the main mass of the tree. Sarah was still trapped in the wingback chair, but the wooden frame was no longer separate from her body. Dark, polished splinters were pushing up through the upholstery, sliding under her thighs and into her lower back, grafting her flesh to the mahogany structure. She looked like a living statue, her eyes darting in terror as the chair's wooden arms grew over her wrists, blossoming into thick, bark-covered cuffs that fused with her bone. The needle threads weren't finished with our faces. I felt a cold, sharp prick at the corner of my left eye. The surgical precision was nauseating. The needle dragged the green filament through my upper eyelid, then the lower, cinching them together with a wet, sliding tension. It didn't close them entirely. The entity left a tiny, pinhole-sized gap in the center of each stitch. It wanted us to watch. It needed us to witness the celebration it was preparing. Through those narrow, agonizing slits, I could see the living room glowing with a rhythmic, pulsing light that had nothing to do with electricity. The air in the house turned frigid, the thermostat on the wall covered in frost as the temperature plummeted toward 0 degrees. I could see my own breath hitching in the air, but I wasn't shivering. The tree was pumping a thick, viscous sap into our veins through the sutures, a biological antifreeze that kept our blood from crystallizing even as the marrow in our bones felt like ice. It was stealing our caloric heat, sucking the warmth from our organs to fuel its own rapid expansion, keeping us on the razor's edge of life just to use us as batteries. That's when I saw the ornaments. One of the tree's lower branches drifted toward Sarah, and a long, pale cord uncoiled from the bark. It wasn't a vine. It was a translucent, milky string that pulsed with a raw, electric blue light. It looked like a human nerve, stripped of its sheath and stretched to the breaking point. I realized with a jolt of pure horror that these garlands were being pulled directly from our own bodies. The tree was harvesting our nervous systems, threading our very capacity for pain through its branches. Every time the blue light flared, a fresh wave of white-hot agony crested in my brain, the tree literally lighting up with the frequency of our suffering. Above me, the black cones began to swell and split. They didn't drop seeds. Instead, thousands of tiny, pale creatures, no larger than a grain of rice, spilled out like a waterfall of maggots. They had multi-jointed legs and mouthparts that looked like miniature scalpels. They swarmed over my legs and chest, their movements a frantic, dry rustle. They weren't eating me. Not yet. They were cleaning. I felt their tiny blades scraping away the top layer of my skin, peeling back the dead epidermis to expose the raw, weeping dermis beneath. They were preparing our bodies, stripping us down to the meat so we could be more easily absorbed into the growing wood. Through the pinholes in my eyelids, I watched a swarm of them crawl toward Lily, and I realized we were no longer a family. We were just raw material for the harvest. The golden pollen continued to settle, coating my exposed dermis in a shimmering, toxic dust. Suddenly, the freezing cold and the searing agony of the nerve garlands vanished. The dark, bark-covered walls of our living room melted away, replaced by the warm, flickering glow of a fireplace that shouldn't have been there. I saw Sarah standing by the kitchen island, laughing as she frosted a batch of sugar cookies. Lily was twirling in a new red dress, her arms intact, her skin smooth and flawless.
Mark, honey, stop daydreaming and come help us with the tinsel.
It was perfect. It was the Christmas we had planned, a shared dream projected into our dying brains by the tree's chemistry. But beneath the vision of velvet ribbons and the smell of cinnamon, I could still feel the cold truth. In reality, my legs had already turned into fibrous pillars, my marrow being replaced by dense cellulose as I was pulled deep into the floor's root system. We weren't a family anymore. We were a foundation. A sharp, rhythmic thud echoed through the house. A knock at the front door. It was Miller, our neighbor from across the street. Through the pinhole gaps in my stitched eyelids, the hallucination flickered, showing me his distorted face peering through the decorative glass of the front door. He couldn't see the bark or the blood. The tree had grown a layer of translucent resin over the windows, acting as a lens. To him, our stitched, bloated faces, frozen in the rictus of the pollen's euphoria, looked like high-end, hyper-realistic silicone masks.
Man, Mark really went all out this year. Look at those animatronics. They look so happy it's almost creepy. Merry Christmas, guys.
He waved and turned away, his footsteps crunching down the driveway. He was the last chance we had, and he had mistaken our execution for a holiday display. As the dream of Christmas dinner intensified, my real body began to warp. Sharp, hard nodules pushed out from my chest and Sarah's shoulders. They were dark, wet cones, new seeds, swelling as they drank from our vital fluids. These weren't just pine cones. They were the offspring of the entity, gestating in our ribs, waiting for the spring thaw to be carried away by birds or the wind. The house couldn't hold the pressure any longer. With a series of heavy, structural groans, the drywall shattered and the roof beams snapped like toothpicks. The suburban home collapsed inward, but nothing fell to the ground. The tree had woven a massive, impenetrable cocoon of black wood around us, a spire of ancient timber that stood 60 feet tall in the middle of the wreckage. Inside, Sarah, Lily, and I were no longer separate entities. Our bones had fused into a single, spiraling lattice. Our nervous systems were a unified circuit of humming pain that fed the black heart of the wood. Spring arrived with a cruel, bright sun. The massive cocoon finally split open, crumbling into rich, dark mulch. The house was gone, the neighbors long ago having assumed we had simply fled our debts in the middle of the night. But in the center of our empty lot, a perfectly straight, unnaturally beautiful grove of young firs had sprouted. They were 7 feet tall, their needles as sharp as scalpels, and their bark the color of bruised ink. By the side of the road, a new sign appeared, hand-painted on weathered plywood. It was time for the first harvest.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Creepy Horror Stories. This original story, Pine Needle Sutures, was written specially for this channel. It makes you wonder about the price of a perfect holiday. What would you have done if you found your house blocked by those roots? If you enjoyed this dark tale, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss our next descent into terror. Check out our other videos for more spine-chilling content. Stay safe in the dark. And remember, not every gift is meant to be opened. Goodbye for now. Thank you for listening to the very end. This original story was written and produced exclusively for Creepy Horror Stories. It makes you look at your Christmas tree a little differently, doesn't it? How would you have reacted if you saw those green threads starting to grow from your own skin? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dark journey, please hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss our next upload. Don't forget to check out the other chilling tales on our channel. Sleep with one eye open, and we'll see you in the next story.